The flashbulbs were like 1,000 tiny suns, blinding and hot. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wave of sound that vibrated through the floor, up my legs, and into my chest. Beside me, Eleanor squeezed my hand. Her touch was electric, a current of triumph that flowed from her into me. Her smile was radiant, aimed at the cheering sea of faces but meant, I knew, for the cameras. It was a smile that had won over a city, a smile that promised integrity, strength, and hope. It was a perfect smile, a perfect lie. I smiled back, a carefully crafted expression I had practiced in the mirror for months. It was the smile of the proud husband, the supportive partner, the silent pillar behind the great woman. They saw a devoted husband, a man content to live in the shadow of his brilliant wife. They had no idea they were watching a ghost at a funeral. Her funeral. Eleanor leaned toward the microphone, the cheers crescendoing. Thank you, she said, her voice ringing with emotion. Thank you for your belief. Thank you for your trust. I watched her. This woman I had loved more than my own life, and felt nothing but a cold, clean emptiness. The warmth in my heart had been burned away, leaving only ash and a single, hard diamond of purpose. In a few moments, the world would see her as I now saw her. Not as a rising star, but as a falling one. It all started 6 months ago, in the quiet darkness of our perfect home. Our house was a classic Georgetown brownstone, a 3-story fortress of brick and ivy on a quiet, tree-lined street. It wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary. It smelled of old books, lemon polish, and the dark roast coffee I brewed every morning. It was the physical manifestation of the life we had built together, a life of intellectual pursuits, quiet ambition, and what I had believed to be unshakable love. I am David Vance, a professor of English literature at Georgetown University. My world was one of metaphors and dusty pages, of teaching Shakespeare to bright young minds who were just beginning to understand the complexities of the human heart. I lived a life of the mind, a life I loved, but my greatest pride, my most profound passion, was my wife, Eleanor. Eleanor was not like me. While I found comfort in the quiet corridors of academia, she thrived in the roaring arena of politics. She was a force of nature, a symphony in motion. When she walked into a room, the air crackled with her energy. She was running for Congress, and everyone said she was a shoo-in. She had the charisma, the intelligence, and the relentless drive. Most importantly, she had a story, a perfect story. The brilliant lawyer turned public servant, the loving mother, the devoted wife. I was a key part of that story. I was a steady ground beneath her soaring ambition. I managed the household. I made sure our 14-year-old daughter, Lily, never felt neglected by her mother's demanding schedule. And I stood by her side at every fundraiser and rally, my quiet academic presence lending her an air of substance and stability. I didn't mind the background. I believed in her. I believed in the change she promised to bring. I believed that her ambition was a noble one, a fire that would warm the world, not just burn for itself. I was a fool. Our daughter, Lily, was the center of our universe. She had my quiet introspection and her mother's sharp wit. She was our greatest collaboration, the living proof of our love. In the evenings, when Eleanor was out at yet another campaign event, Lily and I would sit in my study, surrounded by my books. We would talk about everything from the symbolism in The Great Gatsby to the drama of her high school debate team. Those moments were my anchor. They were the realest part of my life. Dad, she'd said one night, looking up from her history textbook, do you ever miss being the one on stage? I had looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? Sweetheart? Well, you're so smart. You could be anyone, do anything. But you're always just standing behind Mom. I had smiled then, a genuine, unforced smile. I put my arm around her. Being the person who supports the one on stage is its own kind of important. I told her, your mother is doing something incredible. She's going to help a lot of people. And helping her do that, that's my contribution. It makes me proud. And I was proud. God, I was so proud. I loved the way her eyes would find mine across a crowded room. A silent acknowledgement that we were a team. I loved the way she would come home late, exhausted but exhilarated, and tell me every detail of her day while I made her a cup of tea. I had catalogued every one of her smiles, every nuance of her voice. I thought I knew her better than I knew myself. The man who managed her campaign was Thomas Croft. Tom was everything I wasn't: slick, aggressive, and effortlessly charming in a way that always felt calculated. He was brilliant. I had to admit. He had an instinct for politics that was almost predatory. Eleanor said he was the best in the business. The key to her victory. I accepted him as a necessary part of our lives. Another late-night phone call. Another strategy meeting that ran into the early hours of the morning. I shook his hand at events. Shared polite conversation. And never once suspected that his ambition wasn't just for Eleanor's career, but for her. The illusion shattered on a Tuesday night in April. It was cold for spring, and a persistent rain tapped against the window panes. Eleanor had been at a town hall meeting that had run late. I had waited up for her, as I always did, but eventually drifted off to sleep in my armchair, a book lying open on my chest. I woke up around 3 in the morning. The house was still and silent. The lamp beside me cast a warm, lonely glow on the room. Eleanor's side of the bed was empty. I assumed she was still working in her home office downstairs. A common occurrence. A familiar restlessness settled over me. The kind of sleeplessness that feels like a premonition. I decided to go down to the kitchen for a glass of water. The old wooden stairs groaned softly under my weight. A familiar, comforting sound. As I reached the bottom of the staircase, I heard her voice. It was coming from her office. The door slightly ajar. She was on the phone. I smiled to myself, thinking it was probably Tom, going over polling numbers one last time. Her dedication was admirable. I paused in the hallway, not wanting to interrupt. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, and then I heard her laugh. It was a soft, throaty chuckle, a sound I knew intimately. It was the laugh she used when Lily told a silly joke, the laugh she used in the darkness of our bedroom when I whispered something in her ear. But this time, it was different. It was laced with something I couldn't quite place, something cruel. "Oh, Tom, stop," she whispered into the phone, and the sound of his name, spoken with such familiar intimacy, sent a strange chill down my spine. "You know he buys it. David's so wonderfully naive. He'll believe anything I tell him." My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, my hand hovering over the doorknob to the kitchen. Naive? She thought I was naive? Her voice continued, a silky thread of poison in the quiet house. The fundraising retreat in the Berkshires. "Please." The only thing we raised was the thread count on the hotel sheets. She laughed again. And this time I recognized the undertone. It was mockery. She was mocking me. Mocking the trust I had placed in her. The life I had so carefully tended for her. I felt the blood drain from my face. The Berkshires. That was last weekend. She had called me from there. Her voice tired but happy. She told me how grueling the meetings were. How much she missed me and Lily. She had painted a vivid picture of strategy sessions and donor lunches. A picture I had believed without question. A picture that was now burning to the ground in my mind. "No. He's asleep," she said, her voice dropping even lower. "He's probably dreaming about iambic pentameter or something. He's a good man. Tom. A good, simple man. The perfect accessory. An accessory. Like a handbag. Or a pair of shoes. Not a partner. Not a husband. A prop for her perfect stage play." The aha moment wasn't a shout. It was a silent, deafening implosion. Every shared glance, every late-night conversation, every sacrifice I had made replayed in my mind. But now they were cast in a sickening new light. The foundation of my life, the very bedrock of my identity, had just turned to sand beneath my feet. I had been so proud to be the man behind the woman. I never realized I was just a man she was hiding behind. I backed away from the door slowly, silently. I didn't go into the kitchen. I no longer felt thirsty. I felt a coldness spreading through my veins, a glacial calm that pushed away the initial shock. I went back up the stairs, each step a deliberate, soundless movement. I got back into our bed, lying on my side, facing the door. I didn't close my eyes. An hour later, she slipped into the room. She moved with practiced quiet, thinking she was being careful not to wake me. She slid under the covers, her back to me. For a moment, a wave of raw, primitive grief washed over me. I wanted to shake her awake, to scream, to demand answers, to let the rage and the pain pour out of me. But then I saw it, the reflection of her face in the dark glass of the bedroom window. The moonlight caught the screen of her phone as she held it. I could see the faint glow of a text conversation. And I saw her smile. It was a small, secret smile. A smile that wasn't for me. A smile for the man she had just been talking to. In that instant, The grief died. The pain receded. And something new, something hard and sharp, began to form in its place. She thought I was a simple man, an accessory. She had underestimated me. She had underestimated the quiet man who reads Shakespeare. She had forgotten that Shakespeare's best plays aren't just about love and poetry. They're also about tragedy and revenge. Lying there in the dark, next to the stranger who was my wife, I felt the first stirrings of a new plot. My own perfect play. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she would be the tragic hero. I moved through the next few days in a haze of feigned normalcy. It was the most difficult acting of my life. I made coffee in the morning, the rich aroma filling a kitchen that now felt like a stage set. I smiled at Eleanor when she came down, dressed in one of her immaculate pantsuits, ready to conquer the world. I asked about her day, about the campaign. I listened to her lies, nodding and offering the supportive words she expected to hear. Each word was ash in my mouth. The polls are looking incredible, David, she'd say, her eyes shining with ambition. Tom's new ad strategy is a game changer. That's wonderful, honey, I'd reply, my voice a perfect imitation of the husband I used to be. No one deserves it more than you. And as I said it, I would meet her gaze, searching for any flicker of guilt, any sign of the woman I had married. I found none. There was only the politician, focused and driven, her eyes fixed on the prize. Inside, I was a storm of conflicting emotions. Grief was a constant, physical ache in my chest. Betrayal was a bitter taste that never left my tongue. But beneath it all, a cold, methodical anger was taking root. It was the anger of a scholar, a quiet man who had built his life on the principles of logic, reason, and truth. My wife had made a mockery of all three. My love for her had been passionate, but my desire for justice was becoming something far more powerful. I couldn't confront her. A direct confrontation would be emotional, messy. It would give her the upper hand. She was a master of words, of spin. She would twist my pain into the ravings of a jealous, insecure husband. She would paint me as a man threatened by her success. The media, her supporters, perhaps even our daughter, would believe her. I would become a footnote in her triumphant story, a minor obstacle she had gracefully overcome. No, that would not be the narrative. I would write the narrative. My first step was a quiet visit to a part of the city I rarely frequented. It was a grimy, anonymous neighborhood of pawn shops and check-cashing stores. I found the burner phone store tucked between a bail bondsman and a tattoo parlor. I paid in cash for a simple, untraceable phone and a prepaid SIM card. Holding it in my hand, I felt a strange thrill. It was a tool of a world I only knew from novels, a world of secrets and shadows. It was the first piece of my new identity. My second step was finding Frank Miller. I found his name on a discreet online forum for private investigators. The reviews were sparse but consistent. He's not cheap, but he's the best. No nonsense. Gets the job done. His office was on the second floor of a walk-up building above a tired-looking diner. The air on the stairs smelled of stale grease and old coffee. The office itself was small and cluttered. Stacks of files teetered on every surface. A film of dust covered everything except for the man sitting behind the desk. Frank Miller was in his early 60s, with a face like a roadmap of every bad decision he'd ever made. He had tired, cynical eyes that seemed to have seen the worst of humanity, and were no longer surprised by any of it. He wore a cheap suit that looked like he'd slept in it. He didn't get up when I walked in. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Have a seat." The chair in front of his desk protested loudly as I sat down. I had prepared a story. I was a concerned friend, worried about the wife of a colleague. It was a weak, transparent lie, and Frank saw right through it. He let me finish my clumsy explanation, then took a long, slow sip of coffee from a stained mug. He set it down with a clatter. "Let's cut the crap, Professor," he said, his eyes boring into mine. "This is about your wife, isn't it? The one running for Congress, Eleanor Vance." My carefully constructed composure crumbled. I just nodded, feeling a flush of shame. "It always is," he sighed, leaning back in his creaky chair. "The bigger the ambition, the bigger the secrets. What do you want to know?" "Everything," I said, the word coming out as a hoarse whisper. "I need to know everything." He named his price. It was astronomical. It was a significant portion of my savings, the money I had carefully set aside from my university salary. I didn't hesitate. I wrote him a check. "Cash is better," He grunted, looking at the check with disdain. But this'll do to start. I need a retainer. And a photo of the guy. I slid a picture across the desk. It was a press photo from a campaign event. Eleanor was at a podium, radiant. Beside her, slightly in the background, was Thomas Croft. He was looking at her, a proprietary smile on his lips. I had never noticed it before. Now, it was all I could see. Her campaign manager, Frank said, barely glancing at the photo. Classic. It's always the one who's closest. Give me a week. That week was the longest of my life. I went through the motions of my existence. I lectured on Keats's odes, my voice droning on about beauty and truth while my mind was consumed by ugliness and lies. I helped Lily with her homework, my heart aching with the fear of how this would inevitably hurt her. Every night, I lay next to Eleanor, the space between us a chasm of unspoken truths. I listened to her breathe, wondering if she ever dreamt of him. At home, I started my own quiet investigation. I became a ghost in my own house, a detective searching for clues to a crime that had been committed against my heart. I went through her credit card statements online, looking for expenditures that didn't match her campaign schedule. A hotel bar charge in a city she wasn't supposed to be in. A receipt from a restaurant for two on a night she claimed to be working late alone. They were small things, breadcrumbs, but they were leading me down a dark path. Her laptop was a fortress. It was password protected. Of course. For years, I had respected her privacy. That respect was now a casualty of war. I sat in her office one afternoon when she was out, staring at the login screen. What would her password be? I tried the obvious ones first. Lily's birthday. Our anniversary? The name of our first pet. Nothing. Then I thought about her. Really thought about her. What was the most important thing in the world to Eleanor? It wasn't me. It wasn't even Lily. Not really. It was her ambition. I typed in the one thing that had defined her for the past 2 years, Vance for Congress 2024. The screen unlocked. For a moment, I just sat there, my heart pounding. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. It was the first time I had truly outthought her. The first time I had seen the world through her cold, strategic eyes. Her mails were a revelation. They were mostly professional, filled with campaign jargon and scheduling details. But the ones between her and Tom had a different tone. They were filled with inside jokes, with shared frustrations, with a level of intimacy that went far beyond a professional relationship. They called me the professor in their messages, a nickname that now felt like an insult. The professor is taking Lily to her debate tournament this weekend. One of her emails to Tom read. That gives us a clear window. The usual place? Booked? He replied. Can't wait to discuss strategy with you. The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. They were coordinating their affair around my parenting schedule. They were using my devotion to my daughter as a cover for their deceit. I saved copies of everything to a hidden, encrypted hard drive. Every email, every statement. I was building an arsenal. At the end of the week, my burner phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. My office. 10 minutes. Frank Miller didn't waste time with pleasantries. He tossed a thick manila envelope onto his desk. It landed with a heavy thud. There you go, Professor, he said, leaning back. Your wife and her boy toy. All the sordid details. My hands trembled as I opened the clasp. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. They were grainy, long lens shots. But the images were brutally clear. Eleanor and Tom, getting into a car together. Eleanor and Tom, checking into a boutique hotel in Virginia, far from the campaign trail. Eleanor and Tom, sharing a meal at a secluded restaurant, his hand covering hers on the table. And then, the final, devastating series of photos, Eleanor and Tom on the balcony of their hotel room, silhouetted against the evening sky. He was standing behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist. She was leaning back into him, her head tilted up to kiss him. I stared at that last photo for a long time. The man in the picture was not the quiet academic who helped his daughter with her homework. The woman was not the inspiring leader who spoke of family values on television. They were strangers. And in that moment, I knew that the man I used to be loving, trusting husband was gone forever. He had died in that dark hallway, listening to his wife's laughter. In his place was someone else, someone colder and more determined. I looked up at Frank. My face felt like a mask of stone. This is a good start, I said, my voice steady. But it's not enough. I don't just want to prove she's having an affair. I want to know everything. Dig deeper. I want to know where the money is going. Follow the money. Frank raised a bushy eyebrow. A flicker of something that might have been respect in his cynical eyes. Following the money gets expensive. Professor. And dangerous. I don't care about the cost. I said. My voice as cold as a feeling in my chest. I want the truth. All of it. He gave a slow nod. Your funeral. He grumbled. But he picked up the phone. I walked out of his office and into the fading afternoon light. The city seemed different. Sharper. Its colors more intense. The world hadn't changed. But I had. I was no longer a victim of Eleanor's story. I was the author of her ending. The play was in motion. The second act was about to begin. With Frank Miller digging into the financial veins of the campaign. My life bifurcated into two distinct, parallel streams. By day, I was Professor Vance, discussing the tragic flaws of characters in Greek literature. While privately, I was nursing my own. I was a doting father, helping Lily navigate the treacherous waters of teenage friendships and first crushes. I was a supportive husband, attending fundraisers and town halls, shaking hands and smiling until my jaw ached. I played my part with a discipline that surprised even myself. At night, however, when the house was quiet and my family was asleep, I descended into the rabbit hole. My study, once a sanctuary of literature and learning, became a war room. The walls were still lined with books, but my desk was now the territory of bank statements, encrypted files, and the burner phone that had become my lifeline to Frank. Eleanor, consumed by the escalating demands of her campaign, noticed nothing. If anything, my placid, supportive demeanor seemed to put her at ease. She was more relaxed around me, more open, because she believed I was exactly what she told Tom I was, a good, simple man. Her arrogance was becoming my greatest asset. She would come home late, smelling of the generic perfume she wore to public events, and tell me about her day. We secured a major endorsement from the union today, she'd say, kicking off her heels with a sigh of relief. Tom was a genius. He completely outmaneuvered Henderson's team. He's certainly dedicated. I would reply, my voice carefully neutral. I pictured Tom's proprietary smile, his hand on her back, and I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. I would take the files Frank had sent me, records of Tom's own questionable spending on the campaign's demean, lock them securely in my desk drawer. Frank's updates came in cryptic texts. New thread. Pulling on it. Or found a loose brick in the wall. Each message sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. He was a bloodhound on a scent. He started with the campaign's official filings. On the surface, everything looked clean, meticulously audited. But Frank had been a cop in D.C. for 30 years. He knew that the real dirt was never on the surface. He started looking at the vendors the campaign used, the printing companies, the catering services, the media buyers. He found that a few of them were shell corporations, registered to anonymous P.O. boxes. The payments made to these companies were substantial, far exceeding what would be expected for the services listed. This is where they're washing it, Frank explained over a crackling line on the burner phone one night. We never met in person anymore. It was too risky. They overpay these fake companies for consulting or printing. The shell company kicks back a portion of the money in cash to a third party. And poof, untraceable funds for whatever they want. And what do they want? I asked, though I already feared the answer. 5-star hotels, Michelin-star restaurants, a very nice lease on a Porsche for Mr. Croft. Your wife is using campaign donations to fund her affair. Professor. The revelation hit me harder than the photos had. This wasn't just a betrayal of me. It was a betrayal of every single person who had donated to her campaign. Every volunteer who believed in her message. She was stealing from the very people she promised to serve. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. My quiet quest for personal justice was now bleeding into something much larger. My resolve hardened. This was no longer just about a broken heart. It was about exposing a fraud. But the deeper Frank dug, the more complicated the picture became. He found a pattern of payments from these shell corporations that didn't go to Tom, or to luxury expenses. They went to a private account under a name I didn't recognize, Summers. The payments were regular, consistent, and had been going on for years, long before the current campaign. Who is Summers? I asked Frank. Don't know yet. He grunted. But your wife is paying them a hell of a lot of money to stay quiet about something. This smells old. This smells like a secret she's been burying for a long time. While Frank chased the ghost of Summers. I focused on a more personal history. I needed to understand the lie from its very beginning. I started going through old photo albums, financial records from the early years of our marriage, anything that might hold a clue. It was a painful exercise in nostalgia. I saw pictures of us when we were younger, a trip to Italy. The day we brought Lily home from the hospital. In every photo, we were smiling. We looked happy. We looked real. Was it all a performance? Even then, the key, I realized, might be in the one major financial event of our early marriage, my inheritance. My father had passed away 15 years ago, leaving me a substantial sum of money. I was a young professor then, unconcerned with finances. Eleanor, even then a pragmatic and ambitious lawyer, had taken charge. She had said we should invest it wisely, put it into a diversified, long-term fund for Lily's future and our retirement. It sounded sensible. I trusted her completely. I had signed the paperwork without reading it too closely. I had been grieving my father, and she had been my rock. Now, I needed to see that paperwork. I remembered she kept all our important documents in a fireproof safe in the back of her closet. Getting into it was a challenge. She was the only one who knew the combination. I waited for an evening when she was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at a major gala, an event that would keep her out until well after midnight. Lily was at a sleepover with a friend. The house was mine. My heart hammered against my ribs as I knelt in her closet, the scent of her perfume hanging in the air around me. The safe was small and heavy. I tried her birthday. Lily's birthday. Our anniversary? Nothing. I felt a surge of frustration. Then I thought back to the laptop password. Vance 4 Congress 2024. Her ambition was her key. What was her ultimate goal? The Senate. The White House. I tried Vance 4 President. The safe remained locked. I was about to give up when my eyes fell on a framed photo on her dresser. It was a picture of her with her mentor, a former governor who had been a titan in the party. His name was Marcus Thorne. He had been a father figure to her, the one who first encouraged her to run for office. His career had ended in a scandal, but she still revered him. I remembered something she had said once, that Thorne's greatest political achievement was the passage of a specific piece of legislation, Bill H.R. 1871. It was an obscure tax reform bill, but it was his legacy. I knelt down again. I entered the numbers. 1871. A soft click echoed in the silent closet. The handle turned. I felt a chill run down my spine. Her hero's legacy was more important to her than her own family. Inside the safe were birth certificates, passports, and a stack of manila folders tied with string. I found the one labeled Vance Family Trust. My hands shook as I opened it. The documents were dense with financial jargon, but I forced myself to read them, line by line. What I found made the affair with Tom feel like a minor indiscretion. The money from my inheritance had never been invested in a diversified fund. The statements were forgeries, expertly crafted to show modest but steady growth over the years. The real transaction records told a different story. The entire sum, every last penny, had been transferred out of the trust account in a single wire payment, just days after it was deposited. The recipient was an LLC I had never heard of. An LLC that, after a quick search on my phone, I discovered was connected to a high-powered D.C. law firm specializing in crisis management and scandal settlements. She hadn't invested my inheritance. She had used it. All of it. For what? To pay for what? The breath left my body in a rush. I felt dizzy. Nauseous. This was a betrayal on a scale I couldn't comprehend. She hadn't just cheated on me with another man. She had built our entire life, her entire career, on a foundation of my money, stolen from me under the guise of love and trust. The perfect house, the expensive schools for Lily, the seed money for her first local campaign. It had all been funded by the ghost of my father. I sat on the floor of her closet for what felt like hours, surrounded by the artifacts of her life, the smell of her perfume, and the cold, hard proof of her deception. The rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, terrifying clarity. My wife was not just an adulterer. She was a con artist, a predator who had seen my love and grief as an opportunity. That's when my burner phone vibrated in my pocket. A new message from Frank. Got a hit on A. Summers. Name's Amelia Summers. She was a junior aide on Governor Thorne's staff 20 years ago. The same time Eleanor was his intern. Amelia Summers disappeared from public life right after Thorne's big scandal broke. The one about misappropriating funds. Except maybe it wasn't just about funds. I'm sending you a file. A moment later, an encrypted file appeared on my phone. I opened it. It was a scanned copy of a police report, heavily redacted, that had been buried in a cold case file. It was a complaint filed by an Amelia Summers. It detailed a secret, long-term affair with a powerful politician and an accusation. An accusation that had been quietly made to go away right around the time the governor's financial scandal conveniently erupted, providing the perfect cover story for his resignation. And then, I found the second attachment. It was a non-disclosure agreement, a legal document promising silence in exchange for a substantial, structured settlement. The signature at the bottom, agreeing to pay, was Eleanor Vance, and the amount of the settlement matched, to the dollar, the inheritance I had received from my father. It all clicked into place. The final, horrifying piece of the puzzle. Eleanor hadn't just been Governor Thorne's protégée. She had been his mistress. Amelia Summers must have been the other woman, the one who was going to expose him and, by extension, Eleanor. The scandal that ended his career wasn't about money. It was about an affair, a potential lawsuit, a career-ending secret. And Eleanor, my brilliant, ruthless Eleanor, had used my money. My father's legacy by Amelia's silence, burying the one secret that could have destroyed her own political ambitions before they ever began. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had been betraying me from the very beginning. Our entire marriage was a lie, a carefully constructed stage play designed to hide her dark past and propel her into the future she craved. My grief for the man I used to be was finally complete. He was dead and buried. I stood up, my legs stiff. I put the files back in the safe, closed the door, and spun the dial. I walked out of her closet and left the ghost of my marriage behind. The game had changed. This wasn't about revenge for a broken heart anymore. This was about pulling down a monument to a lie. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. My next call would not be to Frank. It would be to someone who specialized in toppling monuments. Julian Hayes, the most feared investigative journalist in Washington, D.C. The name Julian Hayes was spoken in the halls of power in Washington, D.C. with a mixture of fear and reverence. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the Washington Post, a man whose prose was as elegant as his methods were relentless. He didn't just report the news. He unearthed it, often from depths where politicians and power brokers thought it was safely buried. He had taken down senators, exposed corporate corruption, and dismantled entire political machines with nothing more than a notepad, a source, and an unshakable belief that the truth, no matter how ugly, deserved to see the light of day. He was also a known political adversary of Eleanor's party, a fact that made him the perfect weapon. Getting a meeting with him wasn't easy. His assistant was a formidable gatekeeper. I didn't use my real name or my Georgetown email. I used a burner phone and a new, anonymous email address. I sent a single, cryptic message. I had the real story behind Governor Thorne's resignation, and it leads directly to a current congressional candidate. Hard proof. Your eyes only. 24 hours later, I got a reply. Tomorrow, 4 p.m. The Alibi Bar. The Alibi was a classic D.C. dive bar, dark and smelling of spilled beer and old secrets. It was the kind of place where deals were made and careers were broken over cheap whiskey. I chose a booth in the back, my face obscured by the shadows. I arrived 20 minutes early, my nerves a tangled knot in my stomach. I had brought a laptop with me, containing a single, encrypted folder. In it was everything: Frank's photos of Eleanor and Tom, the campaign's laundered financial records, the forged trust documents, the police report filed by Amelia Summers, and the NDA with Eleanor's signature. It was a digital bomb, and I was about to hand over the detonator. Julian Hayes arrived exactly on time. He was older than his photos suggested, with weary eyes that had seen too much but missed nothing. He moved with a quiet confidence, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on me. He slid into the booth without a word and gestured for the waitress. "Whiskey. Neat," he said, then turned his full attention to me. "You have my interest, Mr. Doe. Don't waste my time." I didn't. I opened the laptop, entered the password, and turned it to face him. "This is a story," I said, my voice low and steady. "And I'm the husband. For the next hour." He said nothing. He just read. He clicked through the files with an unnerving stillness, his face a mask of professional concentration. He absorbed the details of the affair, the financial malfeasance, the forged documents, and the decadole cover-up with the same dispassionate focus. I watched his eyes move across the screen, a jury of one processing the evidence of my wife's life of lies. I had expected some reaction, a raised eyebrow, a sharp intake of breath, but there was nothing. He was a surgeon examining a disease. When he finally finished, he closed the laptop and pushed it back toward me. He took a long sip of his whiskey, the ice clinking softly in the glass. He looked at me. Really looked at me. For the first time, his weary eyes held a flicker of something new. It wasn't pity. It was a kind of professional empathy. She built her entire career on your father's grave, he said, his voice a quiet rasp. It wasn't a question. It was a summation. Yes, I replied. And now you want to tear it all down. I want the truth to be told, I said, choosing my words carefully. I believe the public has a right to know who they are voting for. A faint, mirthless smile touched his lips. Of course. You do. But let's be honest. Professor Vance, this is about justice. Or maybe it's about revenge. I don't care which. The story is the story. And this is one hell of a story. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The affair is tawdry. The campaign finance stuff is a solid crime. But the old secret, the cover-up with your inheritance, that's the heart of it. That's the character piece. It shows a pattern of ruthless deception that goes back years. That's what will destroy her. We spent the next hour mapping out a strategy. It was a masterclass in political demolition. Julian wouldn't just drop the story. That would be too simple. It had to be timed for maximum impact. He explained that a scandal's power is measured by its timing. Release it too early, and she has time to recover. To spin it, to muddy the waters. Release it too late, and it gets lost in the election day noise. The primary election night, he said, his eyes gleaming with a hunter's intensity. She'll win. The polls are clear on that. She'll be on stage, giving her victory speech. The cameras will be on, live, across every network. She'll be at her most triumphant, her most invincible. And that, he said, tapping a finger on the table for emphasis, is when we strike. The plan was as elegant as it was brutal. His article, a meticulously sourced and devastating expose, would go live on the Post's website at exactly 8 p.m. on election night, right in the middle of her victory speech. At the same time, a curated package of the most damning evidence-of photo of her kissing Tom, then that would be anonymously leaked to a network of political bloggers and rival news outlets, to ensure it spread like wildfire. But we need a visual for the TV cameras, Julian mused. Something that will cut through the noise in the room. An idea, cold and brilliant, formed in my mind. Her campaign's tech director, I said. A young guy. Ambitious. Frank found out he's been passed over for a promotion he was promised. He's disgruntled. And he owes money to some very unsavory people. He's vulnerable. Julian's smile widened. I have people who can persuade him to help. A little cash. A promise of a future job somewhere far from here. What do you want him to do? During her speech, I said, the words feeling alien on my tongue. She'll be standing in front of a giant video screen. It will be showing her campaign logo. I want him to switch the feed. To what? To the photo, I said. The one of her and Tom on the hotel balcony. Julian was silent for a moment. Then he let out a low whistle. Professor, he said, shaking his head with a look of grudging admiration. You have a taste for the theatrical. I left the bar feeling hollowed out, but with a new sense of terrifying purpose. I had set in motion a chain of events that I could no longer stop. I had allied myself with men who operated in the shadows. Men like Frank and Julian. And I had become one of them. The line between David Vance, the grieving husband, and the cold-blooded strategist had been erased. The weeks leading up to the primary were a surreal blur. I lived inside the lie, perfecting my performance. I was the most supportive husband in America. I stood by Eleanor's side at the final rallies, my arm around her. Our daughter Lily sometimes between us. The perfect picture of a family united. Lily was so proud of her mother. She would watch her on stage, her eyes wide with adoration. Every adoring look she gave her mother was a knife in my heart. She had no idea she was cheering for a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion. One evening, a few days before the vote, Eleanor and I were alone in the kitchen. She was exhausted, the strain of the final push showing in the faint lines around her eyes. She leaned against the counter, watching me make tea. Thank you, David, she said suddenly, her voice soft. I turned, surprised. For what? For everything, she said. For being so patient, so supportive. I know I haven't been. present lately. But it's almost over. Once we win this, things will be different. It'll be me and you again. I promise. She came over and put her arms around me, resting her head on my chest. For a terrifying second, the old David, the one who loved this woman more than anything, threatened to surface. A wave of grief and longing so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I could have ended it right there. I could have told her I knew. We could have screamed and cried and shattered our lives in the privacy of our own home. But I thought of the stolen inheritance. I thought of her calling me an accessory. I thought of the years of lies. I steeled myself, the coldness returning like a shield around my heart. I wrapped my arms around her, held her close, and breathed in her scent one last time. I know. Honey. I whispered into her hair. We're a team. I'll always be here for you. It was the most profound lie I had ever told. As I held her, I could feel the seconds ticking down. The inexorable approach of election night. The final act was set. The audience was waiting. And I, the ghostwriter of her tragedy, was ready for the curtain to rise. The day of the primary election dawned bright and clear. A perfect blue sky over Washington, D.C. The kind of optimistic weather that felt like a political omen. For Eleanor, it was a day of triumph. For me, it was a day of judgment. I moved through the hours like a man in a dream, my actions detached from my emotions. I drove Eleanor to our local polling station, a school gymnasium buzzing with activity. We posed for the cameras, my arm around her, Lily beaming between us. I cast my vote, my hand steady as I filled in the bubble next to her name. It was a small, final act of hypocrisy in a sea of them. All day, my burner phone remained silent in my pocket. A sleeping serpent. Julian and I had agreed, no communication. The plan was in motion. The pieces were in place. Any contact would be an unnecessary risk. My only job now was to play my part to the very end. As evening fell, we made our way to the campaign headquarters, a grand ballroom in a downtown hotel that was already overflowing with supporters, staff, and journalists. The energy in the room was electric, a palpable thrum of anticipation and impending victory. Cheers erupted every time a new projection flashed on the giant screens, each one showing Eleanor with an insurmountable lead. Tom Croft, slick and confident in a perfectly tailored suit, navigated the room like a shark. He clapped men on the back and flashed charming smiles at the women. At one point, he approached me, a triumphant grin on his face. "We did it, David," he said, his voice loud over the din. "She's going to win by a landslide." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of fox camaraderie that sent a jolt of ice through my veins. "You must be so proud." "Immensely," I said, my voice as calm and even as a frozen lake. Our eyes met for a fraction of a second. I saw in his a flicker of condescension, the victor's pity for the clueless husband. I wondered what he would be thinking in an hour. The networks officially called the race at 7:45 p.m. A deafening roar shook the ballroom. Confetti cannons exploded, showering the ecstatic crowd in a storm of red, white, and blue. Eleanor threw her arms around me, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "We did it, David. We did it," she cried. I held her, burying my face in her shoulder to hide the absolute emptiness on my own. Over her shoulder, I could see Lily, her face glowing with pure, unadulterated pride. The sight of her was a physical blow, the only thing that made me question the terrible righteousness of my plan. I was about to destroy her hero. I was about to break her world. The thought was a shard of glass in my gut, but it was too late to pull it out. The wound was already mortal. A phalanx of aides surrounded us, guiding us toward the stage. We walked through the cheering crowd, a wave of adulation washing over us. The lights were blinding. The noise was a physical wall of sound. We climbed the steps to the stage, and the roar grew even louder. We were back where the story began. The flashbulbs, the cheering crowd, the triumphant music. Eleanor, Lily, and I stood together, waving, smiling. The perfect family. I squeezed Eleanor's hand, a signal I had given 1,000 times before. But tonight, it wasn't a signal of support. It was a signal of goodbye. She stepped to the podium. The crowd quieted. The cameras zoomed in. Her face filled the giant screens on either side of the stage. She looked powerful, unstoppable, presidential. "Thank you," she began, her voice filled with genuine emotion. "Thank you for your belief. Thank you for your trust." My eyes flickered to the clock on one of the television monitors. 7:59 p.m. My heart began to pound, a frantic drum against my ribs. This victory is not just my victory, she continued, her voice soaring. It is a victory for every person who believes that our government should be built on a foundation of honesty, a foundation of integrity, and a foundation of unbreakable family values. My gaze drifted across the front row of journalists. I saw him, Julian Hayes, standing near the back, looking down at his phone. He looked up and our eyes met for a barest fraction of a second across the cavernous room. He gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. 8 p.m. A subtle shift rippled through the press corps. The glow of phone screens suddenly illuminated their faces. A low murmur started, a confused buzz that began to compete with Eleanor's speech. I saw one journalist show his phone to another. The second journalist's eyes went wide. The murmur grew louder. Eleanor, insulated in the bubble of her spotlight, didn't notice at first. She was in her element, her voice ringing with conviction. Because I believe that trust is the most sacred bond we have. The trust between a representative and her constituents. The trust between neighbors. And the trust. She paused, turning to smile at me and Lily. Double quotes. The trust within a family. And then it happened. Behind her, the giant screen flickered. Her smiling campaign logo vanished. For a split second, the screen was black. Then, a new image resolved itself. Massive and brutally clear. It was the photograph. The one from the hotel balcony. Eleanor, her head tilted back, her eyes closed in bliss, kissing Thomas Croft. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room. It was followed by a moment of stunned, absolute silence. The roar of the crowd died as if a switch had been flipped. Every single person in that ballroom, and millions watching at home, was staring at the undeniable proof of her betrayal. Projected 20 feet high, Eleanor was the last to realize it. She was still smiling at us, confused by the sudden silence. Then she saw the looks on the faces in the front row of shock. The horror. She slowly turned. She looked at the screen. The color drained from her face. The confident smile froze, then crumbled. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. She looked like a statue caught in the moment of its own destruction. The politician vanished. In her place was just a woman, stripped bare and exposed before the entire world. Her eyes started wildly, searching for an explanation. She looked at Tom, who was standing at the side of the stage, his face a mask of disbelief and panic. Then, her eyes found mine. In that moment, she knew. The look in her eyes was not one of anger or hatred. It was one of pure, dawning comprehension. She saw it all: quiet nights, my feigned support, my hollow words. She understood that the man she had called a good, simple accessory had just orchestrated the complete and total annihilation of her life. The silence was shattered by the frantic clicking of 100 cameras. The journalists, recovering from their shock, swarmed forward, shouting questions. Congresswoman Vance, who is that man? Is that your campaign manager? Do you have a comment? It was a feeding frenzy. Her aides rushed the stage, trying to form a barrier, but it was useless. The dam had broken. I didn't watch her anymore. I turned to Lily. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with confusion and a dawning horror I knew would haunt me for the rest of my days. She looked from the screen to her mother's crumbling face, and then to me. Dad, she whispered, her voice trembling. What's happening? I didn't answer her. I couldn't. I just reached for her hand, my own feeling cold and lifeless. I pulled her close, shielding her from the chaos, and began to guide her off the back of the stage, away from the flashing lights and the shouting, away from the wreckage of the life we once knew. As we escaped into the chaos of the backstage area, I glanced back one last time. I saw Eleanor, standing alone in the spotlight, a solitary figure in a hurricane of her own making. She looked small, broken. I had done it. I had won. My perfect play had reached its devastating climax. But as I held my sobbing daughter's hand, leading her into an uncertain future, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. Only the cold, heavy weight of the ashes. She always talked about transparency, about bringing the truth to light. I had only helped her keep her promise. The world backstage was a maelstrom of panic. Aides were shouting into headsets, their faces pale with shock. People ran in every direction. A chaotic ballet of an imploding campaign. I kept my grip on Lily's hand, a small, cold anchor in the storm. I pushed through bodies, my focus narrowed to a single objective: the service exit. The strobe-like flashes of cameras followed us. The shouts of journalists a cacophony at our heels. Mr. Vance. Did you know? What's your comment? Sir. Lily. How do you feel? I didn't look back. I wrapped my arm around my daughter, turning her face into my chest, shielding her from the predatory lenses and the vicious questions. She was trembling uncontrollably, her small body racked with silent sobs. We burst through the exit into the cool night air of a loading dock. The sudden quiet a deafening contrast to the chaos inside. I hurried us toward the parking garage, my footsteps echoing in the concrete emptiness. The car ride home was a symphony of silence. I drove through the familiar streets of D.C. The monuments lit up against the dark sky, serene and indifferent to the wreckage of my life. Lily sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, her face streaked with tears. She hadn't said a word since her whispered dad. On the stage, the silence in the car was heavier, more suffocating than any argument could have been. I switched on the radio, keeping the volume low. I needed to know the extent of the damage. It was a mistake. Every station was talking about it. The story had already exploded. A scandal of epic proportions unfolding live on television. A newscaster's grave voice intoned. Sources within the campaign are in disarray. Thomas Croft, the campaign manager seen in the photograph, has reportedly left the venue and is not answering his phone. Political analysts are calling this the most dramatic self-destructs in modern political history. Another voice said, "The question everyone is asking is, who was behind the leak? And who hacked the screen?" I switched it off. The silence rushed back in, thicker than before. Our house, our sanctuary, was no longer safe. As we turned onto our street, we were met with a horrifying sight. A dozen news vans were parked along the curb, their satellite dishes aimed at the sky like weapons. A crowd of reporters and photographers swarmed our front steps, their cameras flashing in the darkness. They looked like vultures circling a fresh kill. "We can't go in there," Lily whispered, her voice cracking. "We won't," I said, my jaw tight with anger. I drove past our own home and turned down the narrow alleyway behind it. I parked the car and killed the engine, plunging us into darkness. "We'll use the back." We slid through the back gate and into our garden. The familiar scent of roses and damp earth filled the air. It was the only thing that felt normal. Inside, the house was unnervingly quiet. The mail was in a neat pile on the hall table. A half-finished puzzle was on the coffee table. It was a museum of a life that no longer existed. I made Lily a cup of tea, my hands moving on autopilot. She sat at the kitchen island, huddled in her coat, looking small and fragile. I placed the mug in front of her. She didn't touch it. "Is it true?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. She wouldn't look at me. She was staring at her reflection in the dark kitchen window. There were no more lies left to tell. The time for performance was over. "Yes," I said. My voice was a stranger's. "She and Mr. Croft?" "Yes." She was quiet for a long time. I could see her shoulders shaking. "For how long?" "I don't know for sure," I said, which was the truth. "A while." Then she turned to look at me. Her eyes, so much like her mother's, were filled with a pain and an accusation that cut me deeper than any political scandal ever could. "And you, Dad?" she asked, her voice gaining a sharp, wounded edge. "Did you know?" This was the moment, the one I had both dreaded and prepared for. I could have lied. I could have pretended to be as shocked as she was. But I owed her the truth. I owed her that one final, terrible piece of honesty. "Yes, Lily," I said, my own voice breaking. I knew. Her face crumpled. It was a look of profound, absolute betrayal. Not just by her mother, but by me. "You knew," she repeated, her voice rising. "You stood there, on that stage, smiling. You let me stand there, smiling and cheering for her. And you knew she was. You knew." "It's complicated, sweetheart," I began. But she cut me off. "No, it's not," she cried, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "It's not complicated at all. She lied to us. And you did too. You pretended. All this time. You've been pretending. I did it to protect you," I said, the words sounding weak and hollow even to my own ears. "Protect me." She shot back, her voice laced with a fury I had never heard from her before. "By letting the whole world find out at the same time I did. By letting me see that picture on a giant screen. That's your idea of protecting me? She was crying openly now. Angry. Heartbroken tears. How could you? How could you both do this? She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and ran from the room, her footsteps pounding out the stairs. A moment later, I heard her bedroom door slam shut with a finality that echoed through the silent house. I stood alone in the kitchen, the untouched cup of tea steaming on the counter. The silence that followed her departure was the sound of my victory. It was the sound of a broken family. It was the sound of my daughter's heart breaking because of a plan I had set in motion. I sank into a chair, the adrenaline and anger that had fueled me for months draining away, leaving behind a vast, empty ache. I pulled out my regular phone and opened a news site. My face, Eleanor's, and the damning photo were everywhere. Vance's scandal was the #1 trending topic in the world. There were articles, videos, opinion pieces. Julian Hayes' Exposed was the lead story in the Post. It was a masterpiece of destruction, laying out every sordid detail of Eleanor's lies, from the affair to the campaign finance violations, all the way back to the stolen inheritance and the cover-up of the Governor Thorne scandal. He left no stone unturned. He had buried her. I saw a clip from a news network. It showed Eleanor being hustled out of the hotel through a crowd of reporters, her face hidden behind a bodyguard's coat. She looked utterly destroyed. The woman who had commanded a stage with such power just an hour ago was now a fugitive from her own life. I had done this. I had brought the truth to light. I had served justice. So why did it feel like I had burned down my own house with everyone I loved still inside? The plan, my perfect play, had worked with flawless precision. But I had forgotten to write a part for myself in the final act. I had forgotten to consider what would be left after the curtain fell. And as I sat there in the ruins, with the sound of my daughter's sobbing drifting down from upstairs, I realized the terrible truth. I was the author of a tragedy, and I had written myself into the loneliest role of all, the victor who had lost everything. The days that followed were a blur of muted colors and muffled sounds. The world outside our house remained a tempest, but inside, a heavy, unnatural quiet had fallen. The news fans eventually thinned out, moving on to the next political carcass. But our lives remained frozen in the immediate aftermath of the explosion. Eleanor did not come home. Her lawyers communicated with mine. The language was cold, transactional, division of assets, custody arrangements, words that reduced 15 years of a shared life into a checklist of legal disputes. I learned through news reports that she had retreated to an undisclosed location, weathering a storm of investigations from the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice. Thomas Croft had vanished completely. His career in politics vaporized overnight. Amelia Summers, tracked down by relentless reporters, gave a single, tearful interview confirming the details of Julian's story before disappearing again, behind a wall of no comments. The story had run its course. The world was moving on. But we were not. My primary focus, my only focus, was Lily. But she had erected a wall around herself that I couldn't seem to penetrate. She would emerge from her room for meals, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. We would sit at the large kitchen table in silence, the space between us charged with unspoken accusations. She was polite, in a distant, formal way that was more painful than any outburst. She spoke to me only when necessary. "Can you pass the salt? I have a debate club meeting after school." She was a ghost in her own home, and I was her jailer. I tried to talk to her, to explain. One evening, I found her in my study, the room that had once been our shared space for conversation and comfort. She was standing in front of the shelves, running her fingers over the spines of the books, but not really seeing them. "Lily," I began softly, "we need to talk about this." She didn't turn around. "There's nothing to talk about," she said, her voice flat. "Mom lied. You lied. End of story." "It's not the end of the story," I insisted, taking a step closer. "What I did it because I was hurt, because she betrayed not just me, but everything we built. She stole from my father. She built her career on a lie that started before you were even born." She finally turned to face me. The anger was gone from her eyes, replaced by a deep, weary sadness that made her seem much older than 14. "And you decided the best way to fix it was to blow up everything? Our whole family? You did it for revenge. Dad, just admit it. It was for justice," I argued, though the word felt hollow. "What's the difference?" She shot back. "Look at us. Is this justice? Mom is gone. Everyone at school whispers when I walk by. Our family is a punchline on late-night TV. You won. Dad, congratulations. You got your revenge. I hope it was worth it. Her words were a physical blow. She walked out of the study, leaving me alone with the silent judgment of 1,000 literary tragedies. She was right. I had acted like a character from one of my books, a man consumed by a singular, righteous quest for vengeance. Blind to the collateral damage, I had set out to expose a villain and had, in the process, become one myself in the eyes of the person who mattered most to me. Weeks turned into a month. The rhythm of our broken life became grimly familiar. I taught my classes, my lectures on tragic heroes now feeling like personal confessions. I came home to a quiet house. I made dinner that was mostly left untouched. The silence was a cancer, eating away at the foundations of what was left of our relationship. The turning point came from an unexpected place. Frank Miller called me on my regular phone for the first time. "Professor," he grunted, his voice as gravelly as ever. "Thought you should know. They found your wife." My heart leaped into my throat. "Found her? What do you mean?" "She's been staying at a wellness retreat in rural Virginia. Not one of those fancy celebrity places. A real one. For people who are really going through it." A reporter got a tip. "There'll be pictures by morning." Something in his tone made me pause. "Frank, is there something else?" He was quiet for a moment. "Look, Vance, I've been doing this a long time. I've seen a lot of people get what's coming to them. Usually, I don't give a damn. But this one, I don't know. Just be prepared." The next morning, the photos were online. They weren't the gotcha shots I expected. They were taken from a long distance, grainy and invasive. They showed Eleanor walking alone on a wooded path. She was unrecognizable. She wore simple sweats, no makeup, her hair pulled back. She had lost a significant amount of weight. The powerful, radiant politician was gone. In her place was a thin, frail woman who looked lost and profoundly broken. She looked older, tired, and utterly defeated. I stared at the photos, and I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no pity, just a vast, hollow emptiness. This was a result of my perfect play. This ghost walking in the woods. Lily saw the photos too. I found her staring at my laptop screen, her hand covering her mouth. For the first time in weeks, I saw something other than anger or sadness in her eyes. I saw fear. Is she okay?" She whispered. "I don't know, honey." I answered honestly. That night, Lily came to me. She found me in the study, where I had taken to spending most of my evenings. She didn't say anything at first, just stood in the doorway, holding a small, framed photo. It was a picture of the three of us, taken on a beach vacation years ago. We were all laughing, sand on our faces, the sun in our eyes, a relic from another life. "I miss her," she said, her voice small. "I hate what she did, and I'm so angry at you for what you did. But she's still my mom, and I'm scared for her." And in that moment, the last of my cold, hard armor of righteousness cracked. Looking at my daughter's face, her fear and her grief, I finally understood the true cost of my victory. I had sought to punish one person's lie, but I had ended up punishing everyone, especially the two people I loved most, the daughter standing before me, and the woman in the photograph, the woman who, despite everything, was still my wife. My quest for justice had been a selfish one. It had been about my pain, my betrayal. I had never stopped to think about the aftermath, about the fact that after the fire burned out, we would all have to live in the ashes. "I know, Lily," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm scared too." It wasn't a solution. It wasn't forgiveness. But it was a start. It was the first honest, shared emotion we'd had in months. She walked over and sat in the chair across from my desk, still holding the photo. The silence returned. But this time, it was different. It wasn't angry. It was just sad. A shared sadness. I looked out the window of my study, into the dark, quiet street. I had won my war. I had exposed the truth and brought a powerful person to justice. I had played the game of revenge and emerged the victor. But I was a king on an empty chessboard, in a silent house, with nothing but the ghosts of the past for company. I had set out to direct a perfect play, but I had forgotten the most important rule of tragedy in the end. No one really wins. There are only survivors, and they are left to pick up the pieces in the quiet that follows the final act.